Good morning. Thank you for joining me. This is Barry Bryson, and we're here for another 5 good minutes in the Word. And we're still talking about Peter encountering Jesus. And today we're in Matthew chapter 17, although this event is in the other gospel writers as well. We were with Peter and James and John and Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. It's an amazing event. And I just want to read you Matthew's account and then we'll talk about it a bit. It says in Matthew chapter 17, verse 1, 6 days later, Jesus took with Peter and James and John his brother and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His garments became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him, with Jesus. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. And when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were much afraid. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, Arise, do not be afraid. And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. This is an amazing event that happened, and there's so much for us to talk about in it. In the first place, they were probably on Mount Hermon, which is the highest mountain in that area and is snow-capped and was at the time. So Jesus may very well have been in the snow when he is transfigured. What exactly happened to Jesus? Well, his appearance changed. It's somewhat like the description we get of Jesus in Revelation chapter 1 in his glorified state with his resurrection body, his glorified body, but not exactly. But it was clear something happened. Jesus was in some way invested with something of his glory as God himself, just for this moment, which is important for Jesus because he's not many weeks away from being crucified. And I'm sure it was important for him to remember how close he was to coming home. And then appeared with him Moses and Elijah. There's a lot of discussion about why Moses and Elijah. There are a lot of similarities in the lives. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are the 3 people in Scripture who fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses when he was on Mount Sinai, Jesus when he was in the wilderness being tempted, and Elijah when he was fleeing and went to Mount Sinai himself where God spoke to him. They were all 3 people for whom death was not normal. No one knows where Moses died, but God was there with him when he died, and God himself buried Moses. Elijah, of course, didn't die at all, but was translated from life to the afterlife before Elisha's eyes. And of course, Jesus was raised from the dead after on the 3rd day, excuse me. And so there are a lot of things that tie these men together, but I think the most important reason they're there is that they represent the law and the prophets, the totality of God's communication. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and following, God communicated through the law. He communicated to the fathers. Now he communicates to us through Jesus. There's the verbal communication, the written communication, and the living communication of Christ. And they're all 3 there together. And they're all 3 there together, but not as equals. And we have Peter trying to do the right thing. And we see that these men are mesmerized by this, just overwhelmed by it. And Peter saying, just tell me, I'll obey, and I'll make a shrine to all 3 of you. And before he even finishes speaking, God interrupts him and says, This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. You listen to him. It's an important moment, and it comes about partially because of Peter's misspeaking. God is able to make clear with his voice from heaven that Jesus is his communication. The New Testament and all written scripture exists to communicate Jesus, not in and of itself. Apart from Jesus, it means nothing. And Peter was introduced to that notion that day. We see how strongly the law and the prophets were imprinted on his mind, and it will take a while, even after Jesus' death, even after the baptism of Cornelius, for him to start to really get it for once and for all. But he's introduced to that notion today on the Mount of Transfiguration. Thank you for joining me for this 5 good minutes, and we'll talk more about Peter tomorrow.